Before I tell you what happened, the morning my son and his wife sat across from me with their carefully practiced expressions of concern, let me tell you what happened after. By the time my daughter-in-law reached for her phone to call her mother and celebrate, there was nothing left to celebrate. The account they had been quietly dismantling was already frozen. The attorney was already in the driveway. And they had no idea that the man they had spent 14 months treating like a dying houseplant had spent 31 years building cases that sent people to federal prison. They forgot what I used to do for a living. I spent 3 decades as a forensic auditor for the state of Georgia Attorney General's office. I have never lost a case. I was not about to start with my own son. The summer Dottie passed. I lost the ability to sleep past 4 in the morning. That's when the house goes quiet in a particular way. A way that has a shape and a weight to it that I never noticed when she was alive. For 41 years, the sound of her breathing was the background noise of every night. When it stopped, I became aware of every creak, every tick of the radiator, every car that rolled too slowly past the window at 3 a.m. Dottie would have laughed at me. She would have told me to make myself some warm milk and stop being dramatic. I never did figure out how to make the warm milk the right way. She had a method I never bothered to learn because I always assumed she would be there to make it. I have a house in Savannah that we bought together in 1987 when the neighborhood was not yet fashionable, and the price reflected that. Dottie painted every room herself, a different color for each one, which I thought was ridiculous at the time, and which I now consider one of the finest decisions she ever made. There is a pale yellow in the kitchen that catches the morning light in a way that still stops me some days. She called it buttercream sunrise, and I called it yellow, and we argued about that for 34 years in the good-natured way that long-married people argue, which is to say that neither of us was ever actually angry, and both of us would have been lost without it. My son Nathan called me in October, about 16 months after his mother's funeral. His voice had the particular careful warmth of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. He told me he was worried about me being alone. He told me the house was too large for one person. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that he and Renee had been having some financial difficulties. Nothing serious, just a rough patch. And that it might be good for everyone if they came to stay for a while, just until things stabilized. I said yes, because he was my son, and because the house was, in fact, very quiet, and because I thought that having people in it again might soften the particular silence that had settled into every room since Dottie left. I understand now that I was not thinking clearly. Not because my mind was failing, the way Renee would later suggest to Nathan in conversations she did not know I could hear. I was thinking clearly enough. I was simply thinking with grief instead of professional habit, and grief, in my experience, is the single most effective tool for making an intelligent person behave like a fool. They arrived on a Saturday, with 2 cars packed to the rooflines. Renee walked through the front door and immediately began assessing the layout in the way a general surveys terrain before deciding where to place artillery. She complimented the kitchen and the spare bedroom, but her eyes moved with a calculating precision that I registered and filed away without comment. Nathan carried boxes with the shuffling energy of a man performing enthusiasm he does not feel. He would not quite meet my eyes when I offered to help. They settled in, and the first weeks were manageable. Renee cooked occasionally, efficient meals without warmth, food prepared as fuel rather than pleasure. Nathan would sit with me in the evenings sometimes, and we would watch baseball and not talk much, which I told myself was comfortable. Looking back, it was not comfortable. It was Nathan, sitting with the low humming anxiety of a man waiting for something to happen. The first indication arrived 3 months after they moved in. I received an alert on my phone from my brokerage firm, the kind of automated notification I have set for any significant activity on my accounts. The alert informed me that a request had been submitted to update the account contact information. I had not submitted such a request. I called the brokerage the following morning and was told that someone using my account number had attempted, through the online portal, to add a secondary contact with authorization to receive statements. The attempt had been flagged by their security system and not completed. The secondary contact's email address, which the representative read to me, was one I recognized immediately. It belonged to my daughter-in-law. I thanked the representative, asked her to note the incident, and changed my password and security questions, before I poured my first cup of coffee. Then I sat at the kitchen table in Dottie's yellow room and thought for a long time. I did not confront Nathan. I did not mention it to Renee. I opened my laptop and began the kind of quiet, methodical review that I had been performing professionally since before my son was born. The first thing you learn in forensic audit work is that an anomaly is never isolated. You pull one thread and find that it connects to another and then another until you are holding the edge of something that has been woven together over months or years with considerable care. The brokerage attempt was a thread. I began pulling. I started with the most basic review. I called my bank and requested paper statements for the past 12 months be mailed to me, directing them to use my post office box, which Nathan and Renee did not know existed. I had maintained that box since Dottie's illness because there are certain pieces of mail that a worried spouse does not need to see, and I had wanted to manage her medical paperwork privately. It was, in retrospect, one of the more fortuitous habits of my life. When the statements arrived 2 weeks later, I took them to the screened porch on a Tuesday afternoon, when Nathan and Renee had gone out together, closed the door, and read them with the same attention I would have given to a set of documents subpoenaed from a corporation under federal investigation. What I found was subtle, not crude. Whoever had designed this approach had some understanding of how financial monitoring works, which told me something important about the nature of the plan. There were no large, obvious withdrawals. Instead, over a period of 11 months, there were a series of small charges to a debit card I did not recognize, averaging between $40 and $90 each, occurring every 8 to 12 days, always on weekday afternoons. The total across all transactions was $4,380. Not a fortune, but a pattern, and patterns are what I was trained to read. I did not have a debit card attached to that account other than my own, which was in my wallet. I called the bank the following morning and confirmed what I suspected. A second debit card had been issued 11 months ago as an authorized user card, at the request of someone who had called in using my account details and a security question whose answer, I noted with a cold clarity, was the name of our family dog. A dog Renee had heard Nathan mention twice in conversation since they arrived. I sat with this for a day. Then I called Thomas Garrett. Thomas had been my deputy for 11 years before he retired and opened a private investigation firm in Augusta. We had worked every significant fraud case in the Southern District together for nearly a decade. He was the most methodical man I had ever met, which is saying something given my profession. When I called him and explained what I had found, he was quiet for a moment in the way Thomas is quiet when he is assembling information into a sequence. Then he said, "Walter, they're not done." "I know," I said. "Do you want to stop them or do you want to finish them?" I told him I wanted to finish them. He drove to Savannah 2 days later, arriving while Nathan and Renee were at what they described as a job interview, though Renee's job interviews had been occurring with mysterious frequency for months without any apparent results. Thomas and I sat on the porch, and I showed him everything I had collected: the statements, the brokerage alert, the debit card documentation. He reviewed each item with his reading glasses on the end of his nose, and said nothing until he had looked at everything. "There's more," he said when he finished. "This is preparation. You're looking at the groundwork. The main event is still coming." "Tell me what to do," I said. "First, you make a copy of everything, and I take it to my firm. Second, you call Russell." Russell Okafor was an attorney I had worked with professionally for 20 years. He had the distinction of being both one of the finest estate and elder law attorneys in the state of Georgia, and the kind of man who took a personal interest in what he called the protection of people who've earned their peace. I had testified as an expert witness in 3 cases he had tried. I trusted him with my life. As it turned out, that was not hyperbolic. Russell answered my call on the second ring. When I finished explaining the situation, he was quiet for a moment in a different way than Thomas had been quiet, the way a person is quiet when they are actively restraining their anger. He said, "Walter, I want you to do something for me. I want you to do nothing obvious. I'm going to have my paralegal run a search on your name in the county court system." "Why?" I asked. "Because people who are planning what it sounds like they're planning sometimes file preliminary paperwork before the subject has any idea." a guardianship petition, a competency evaluation request. These things get filed quietly. I've seen it before. He called me back the following afternoon. His voice was flat in the way professional people's voices go flat when they are delivering information that outrages them. "There's a filing, Walter," he said. "It was submitted 6 weeks ago. A petition for limited guardianship of a vulnerable adult. The petitioners are listed as Nathan Briggs and Renee Briggs. The filing alleges cognitive decline, difficulty managing financial affairs, and social isolation. There's an attached affidavit from a psychologist I've never heard of who claims to have conducted a phone-based evaluation." I set my coffee cup down on the table. I looked at the wall of Dottie's yellow kitchen. I thought about the 41 years she and I had spent in this house, the arguments about paint colors and the warm milk she made in a particular way, and the way she said my name at the end of a hard day, low and tired and full of something that had no word for it, but that I have been trying to reconstruct from memory every morning since she left. "What do we do?" I asked Russell. "We build our own filing," he said, "and we do it better than they did. There is a particular kind of mental state that I only ever reached during the most complex cases of my career. I used to describe it to younger investigators as the place past anger where the noise stops, and you can hear the numbers thinking. I had not been in that place since I retired. I found it again the morning after Russell's call, sitting at my desk in the study with the door closed, and I did not leave it for the next 3 weeks. I was meticulous. I compiled a daily cognitive diary, dated and time-stamped, documenting my activities, decisions, and mental state. I underwent a formal neuropsychological evaluation, arranged by Russell, with a physician who had no connection to anyone in my family, and whose credentials were beyond dispute. The results were, as Russell put it when he read them, embarrassingly strong. I documented every financial transaction I had made over the prior 2 years with full supporting receipts and rationale. I gathered a decade of tax returns, investment records, correspondence with my broker, and letters of professional recommendation from colleagues at the Attorney General's office. I was building a portrait of a man in complete possession of his faculties, and I was building it with the precision of someone who had spent 30 years making portraits that would hold up in court. And then the pivot happened. It was a Wednesday. I was at the grocery store, a trip I made alone because I had never stopped making it alone, because the grocery store was one of the few places where the particular silence of the house did not follow me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and looked at the screen. It was a text from Nathan. It said, "He still hasn't connected the debit card to you. I checked his drawer and the statements he has are from last year. Keep moving on the brokerage thing, the ACH setup. 2 more weeks and we'll have access. Mom's stuff in the bedroom I'll handle separately. Renee told me to tell you she found a buyer for the jewelry already. Don't text back on this phone." I stood in the cereal aisle of a Publix grocery store in Savannah, Georgia, and read that message 3 times. He had sent it to me. He had meant to send it to someone else, his wife, I assumed, or possibly the psychologist whose name was on the fraudulent affidavit. He had pressed the wrong contact. I was the first name under B. I did not call him. I did not text back. I took a screenshot of the message with the timestamp clearly visible. I forwarded it to Thomas and to Russell. Then I put a box of oatmeal in my cart, finished my shopping, and drove home. The jewelry he was referring to was Dottie's. She had left me her mother's pearls, an emerald ring her grandmother had brought from Jamaica, and a gold bracelet she had received on our 25th anniversary. They were in a cedar box, on the closet shelf in the bedroom. I checked when I got home. The box was still there. I moved it that afternoon to a location in the house that I will not describe here. Thomas called me that evening. "That text just changed everything," he said. "That's not a civil matter anymore. That's criminal conspiracy." "I know," I said. "Russell is going to file a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition tomorrow morning on procedural grounds. The evaluation affidavit is fraudulent. He can prove it in about 10 minutes. Once that's dismissed, they lose their legal angle." "But Walter," he paused. "The other stuff, the debit card, the brokerage, the text, that goes to the DA." "When?" I asked. "After you talk to them. If that's what you want." I thought about Nathan at 8 years old, The summer I taught him to cast a fishing rod on the lake outside Macon. The way he squinted against the morning sun, the seriousness with which he approached every instruction I gave him, the pure, uncomplicated joy on his face the first time he felt the line go taut. I thought about sitting in the hospital waiting room the night Dottie had her first surgery. Nathan beside me in a plastic chair with his hand on my arm, not saying anything, just staying. I thought about the man who had called me from this same house 4 months ago with a prepared speech about financial difficulties and family and not wanting me to be alone. I thought about Dottie's jewelry in a box on a stranger's shelf. "I want to talk to them first," I said. "I figured," Thomas said. "Tell me when you want Russell there." I chose a Sunday. Sunday had been the family day when Nathan was growing up. Dottie had made it a rule with the seriousness of a commandment. No errands, no phone calls after 6, a real dinner at the table together. I chose Sunday because I wanted Nathan to feel, if he was still capable of feeling it, the particular weight of what he was doing in the context of every Sunday he had ever been given. I told them at breakfast that I wanted to have a family conversation that afternoon, that I had been thinking about my estate and my plans, and that I wanted to share some of my thinking with them and get their input. Renee's face arranged itself into an expression of warm, attentive interest that did not reach her eyes. Nathan looked at the table. He had been looking at the table a great deal lately. I spent the morning in the study, organizing my materials. Russell had prepared a summary document and had arranged for his paralegal to drive over and serve papers at 3 o'clock. Thomas was parked 2 streets over. I had set up my laptop on the dining table, connected to the television in the living room through an HDMI cable. They came to the living room at 2 o'clock and settled on the sofa together. Renee sat forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap, her posture the exact posture of a person who expects to receive good news. Nathan sat back, his arms crossed, his eyes moving between me and the dark television screen with an unease he could not entirely suppress. I sat across from them in the armchair that Dottie had reupholstered in 2014, the one she had picked out of a catalog and shown me by holding the page up while I was trying to read, saying, "This one, Walter. Look at this color. Doesn't it remind you of the water in Savannah in the morning?" I had my laptop on the side table. I opened it. The television came to life. The first thing on the screen was the text message, enlarged to fill the television. My son's name at the top, the timestamp in the corner, every word exactly as he had written it, including Renee's name, including the reference to selling Dottie's jewelry, including "Don't text back on this phone." I watched my son's face. I have watched a great many faces in interview rooms over 30 years, and I have become a thorough reader of the particular moment when a person understands that the story they have been telling has reached its last page. That moment has a specific quality. The eyes change before the face does. I saw his eyes change. Renee's reaction was different. She is a person of considerable composure, and her composure held for approximately 4 seconds before it fractured. That was taken out of context," she said, which was not technically a statement that meant anything given that the text was complete and self-explanatory. But people say things like that when they are trying to buy time for their brain to catch up with the collapse. I clicked to the next slide. It was the debit card documentation, the account number, the date of issue, the transactions itemized by date and amount over 11 months. $40 here, $72 there, $68, $55, $81. Below the itemized list was a total, $4,380. At the bottom, in simple black font, was the name listed as the authorized user, Renee's name. Nathan made a sound, not a word, just a sound, low and involuntary, the sound of a person sustaining an impact. I clicked again, the brokerage alert, the account change request, the email address that had been provided as the secondary contact. I clicked again, the county court filing, the petition for guardianship, the first 2 pages displayed in full, the names of the petitioners in clear print. Nathan's name first, Renee's name second. The date of filing, which was 6 weeks before Nathan had taken any action that would have given him reasonable grounds to allege cognitive concern. Not that any such grounds existed. Not that any such grounds would have existed. I clicked again. This was the document I had requested Russell prepare last. It was a single page with a header from Russell's firm and a two-paragraph summary of the neuropsychological evaluation I had undergone. At the bottom was the evaluating physician's assessment, in plain language. He had written that the subject demonstrated cognitive performance in the 93rd percentile for his age group, and that there was no clinical evidence of any impairment that would warrant diminished legal autonomy. The room was very quiet. Renee stood up. She is a tall woman, and when she stood up, there was an energy to it that in other circumstances might have been intimidating. You can't do this, she said. Her voice had a quality I had not heard from her before. Raw, stripped of the careful social finish she maintained at all times. This is our family. You don't bring lawyers into your family. I looked at her. I am 69 years old, and I have been in this room many times in different forms. The room where someone who has been caught looks for the exit and finds the door sealed. I have never found any satisfaction in it. What I have always found is a kind of sorrowful clarity. The same sorrowful clarity I felt now. You brought lawyers into this family 6 weeks ago when you filed a false petition with the county court, I said. You brought criminals into it when you forged a psychological evaluation. I am simply the one who documented it. Nathan had not moved. He was still on the sofa with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, but his shoulders were shaking. He was crying. I had not seen my son cry since the day we buried his mother, and seeing it now produced in me a feeling I will not try to describe because I do not have adequate words for it. It was grief and love and fury, and something close to mourning all at once. The mourning of a man watching someone he helped build make a choice he cannot undo. Nathan, I said. He looked up. His face was the face of a boy I once taught to cast a fishing rod. It was also the face of a man who had filed legal paperwork to have me declared incompetent so that he and his wife could liquidate my assets before I fully understood what was happening. I know who taught you better than this, I said. She's the reason I can't let this go. The doorbell rang. I stood up and went to the front door. When I opened it, Russell was on the porch in his Sunday clothes, his briefcase in hand, and behind him was a process server holding a manila envelope. Behind them, Thomas Garrett had come around the corner and was coming up the walk. Russell looked past me into the living room with the brief, professional assessment of a man who has walked into a great many difficult rooms and knows exactly what he is doing in each one. Then he looked at me and gave me the small nod that means everything is prepared. My name is Russell Okafor, he said, directing his voice past me toward the sofa. I represent Walter Briggs. I have here a response filing to the guardianship petition submitted to Chatham County Court on September the 14th, along with a formal complaint to be submitted to the State Bar regarding the affidavit submitted by a non-licensed evaluator. I also have here a civil filing in the matter of unauthorized account access and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Georgia Code Section 3058. And I have been asked to inform you that the materials you've seen today, along with the additional evidence compiled by a licensed private investigator, have been provided to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office, which has assigned an investigator to the matter. He paused. You will both be contacted, he said. I would strongly recommend retaining separate counsel. The process server stepped forward and held out the envelope. Neither Nathan nor Renee took it for a moment. Then Nathan reached out and took it from him with a hand that was not steady. Renee said nothing. Whatever she had been about to say, she kept it. She looked at the envelope in Nathan's hand, and then she looked at me, and her face held an expression I found difficult to categorize. It was not remorse. It was something closer to a cold recalibration, the face of a person rapidly restructuring their understanding of a situation they had misread completely. I had nothing left to say to either of them. Everything I had needed to say had been said on a 65-inch television screen in complete and documented clarity. I went to the study and picked up the bag I had packed 3 days earlier. I came back through the living room without looking at the sofa. I walked to the kitchen, that pale yellow room that catches the morning light, and I stood in it for a moment. I ran my hand along the edge of the counter, the old tile countertop Dottie had refused to replace even when the grout went gray because she said the shape of the tiles reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen in Memphis, and some things were worth keeping imperfect. I am not a man who talks to empty rooms. But I stood there for just a moment and I said quietly, I took good care of it. I tried. Then I picked up my bag and walked out through the back door. I drove to my sister Margaret's house on Tybee Island, where a room had been waiting for me for 2 weeks because Margaret is the kind of woman who, when her younger brother calls her and explains a situation, simply says, "Your room's ready," without asking unnecessary questions. I sat on her porch that evening watching the Atlantic and ate the best bowl of she-crab soup I had had in years and didn't say much and didn't need to. Russell called me the following Wednesday. The guardianship petition had been dismissed with prejudice after he submitted the neuropsychological evaluation and a formal complaint regarding the fraudulent affidavit. The so-called psychologist whose name appeared on that affidavit was not licensed in the state of Georgia and had no verifiable credentials. That matter was referred separately to the state licensing board. The DA's office moved quickly. The combination of the text message, the debit card documentation, the brokerage records, and the court filing gave them a layered case. Nathan and Renee were each charged with financial exploitation of a disabled or elder adult under Georgia law, unauthorized use of a financial transaction card, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Renee faced an additional charge related to the guardianship petition. Their separate attorneys negotiated separately, which Thomas told me was a sign of a partnership under significant strain. Nathan called me 4 months later from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I recognized his voice in the first half second. He didn't say much. He said he was sorry. He said he had been sorry since before it happened, and he had done it anyway, and he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. He said Renee was gone. He said the fishing rod was still in his car, the one I had given him on his 40th birthday, because he had never been able to bring himself to take it out. I listened to all of it. I did not say very much. I told him that what he had done had not changed who he had been before he did it, that the boy I had raised was still in him somewhere, and what he chose to do with that was the rest of his life. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right, but it was over, and I was 69 years old, and I had spent enough of my life carrying evidence to know that there comes a time to set it down. The house in Savannah I eventually sold, though I took my time about it. I was not running from it. I was simply ready to close one ledger and open another. On the last afternoon before the new owners took possession, I walked through every room one final time. I stood in the kitchen and let the light come through the window the way it always did in the mornings, that particular angle that turns the yellow walls into something close to gold, and I thought about how Dottie had stood in exactly this spot on the first morning after we moved in 1987, with a cup of coffee in both hands, looking around at the walls she had not yet painted, and she had turned to me and said, "Walter, I think we're going to be very happy here." She was right. We were. We were happy in every room of this house for more than 4 decades. And happiness of that quality and that duration does not disappear when the people who made it are gone. It stays in the walls. It stays in the light. I have an apartment now in a building 3 blocks from the river, small and orderly and entirely mine. Margaret has dinner with me on Sundays. Thomas calls on Wednesdays. Russell sends me holiday cards with handwritten notes, which I appreciate more than he knows. I have taken up fly fishing again for the first time since my early 40s, badly and contentedly, the way a person does something purely for the doing of it. And sometimes, very early in the morning, when the apartment is quiet and the light is just beginning to come, I make myself a cup of warm milk. I haven't quite gotten the method right. I never will, but I keep trying, because some habits are worth keeping even when the person who perfected them is gone. Because the attempt itself is a kind of conversation. Because the quiet of 4 in the morning is not empty. It is the space where everything you built together continues to exist, patient and intact, waiting to be remembered. Before you leave, I want you to hear this. There is nothing about age that makes you smaller. There is nothing about grief that makes you weak. The people who underestimate the quiet ones are always making the same mistake. They see stillness, and they call it surrender. They see patience, and they call it confusion. They look at a man sitting in an armchair reading a book, and they see a problem to be solved rather than a person who is simply waiting for the right moment. 31 years of my career were built on the discipline of the right moment. You do not rush an audit. You do not announce an investigation before the evidence is complete. You gather, you verify, you document, and then you present. You present everything at once, calmly and completely, and you let the truth do what it was always going to do. And then you stand up, pick up your bag, and walk out into the morning, because the morning still belongs to you. It always did. If this story found you when you needed it, share it with someone who needs it too, and leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Your words mean more than you know.